The roses my mother planted along the front walkway were dead. Not wilting, not struggling dead. Brown, brittle, snapped at the stems like they hadn't seen water in weeks. I stood there on the front porch of the house I grew up in, rolling my carry-on behind me, staring at those roses. My mother had babied those plants for 11 years. She talked to them. She moved them slightly left or right depending on the season. She once drove 40 minutes to a specialty nursery just to buy the right kind of fertilizer. And now they were dead. I should have known then. I should have turned around, gotten back in the rideshare, and prepared myself for what I was about to walk into. But I didn't. I knocked on the door instead, because I'd learned long ago not to trust my gut when it came to this family. No one answered. I used my old key. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not filth, just staleness. The particular staleness of a house where the windows haven't been opened in a long time. The kitchen light was on. There were dishes in the sink, 3 or 4 days' worth by the look of them. A cup of coffee sat on the counter, stone cold, a thin film forming on the surface. My father was not in his recliner, where he always was on Saturday mornings. I called his name. Nothing. I walked through the kitchen, down the hall, checked the back porch. His reading glasses were folded on the side table next to the chair. His bookmark, a strip of leather I'd given him for his birthday 6 years ago, was tucked into the novel on the armrest. He hadn't even made it past chapter 2. My phone buzzed. It was my younger brother asking me what I wanted from Chipotle. He thought I was still in Denver. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home. I'd been working a contract position in Denver for 14 months, environmental compliance work. The kind that kept me in hotels and on highways and away from everything I'd left behind. My contract ended 3 days early. I didn't call ahead because I wanted to surprise my father. He'd been asking me to come home for months. In every phone call, every voicemail, every text he sent with the little house emoji at the end, I hadn't come. And now I was standing in his empty house with dead roses outside and cold coffee on the counter, and something in my chest was already starting to collapse. I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. The sound in the background was unmistakable poolside, tropical, someone laughing at something far away. "Hey, honey," she said, bright, unbothered. "What's up? Where's Dad?" A pause. Not a long one. Just enough. He's been having some health stuff. He's being looked after. Don't worry about it. What does that mean? Where is he? Rachel. Her voice shifted into the tone she used when she wanted me to stop asking questions. He had some cardiac episodes. He's at Street Mary's. He's stable. There's nothing for you to do. I didn't want to worry you while you were working. You didn't want to worry me. You were in the middle of a contract. How long? I asked. How long has he been there? Another pause. Longer this time. 17 days. I sat down on the floor. Right there in the hallway, I sat down on the hardwood floor with my coat still on and my carry-on still in my hand. And I sat with that number, 17 days, and I felt something in me that I hadn't felt since I was a little girl, and realized, for the first time, that the adults around me were not always going to protect me. "Where are you?" I asked. "We're in Cabo." "Your brother booked it months ago. It was already paid for." "Way? Your brother and Simone and Dana flew in yesterday." "Dana. My younger sister. Dana is in Cabo. You're all in Cabo. And Dad has been alone in a hospital for 17 days. He's not alone. The nurses." I hung up. I sat on that floor for probably 4 minutes. Then I got up, left my carry-on by the door, got back in my car, and drove to Street Mary's. He was on the 3rd floor, the cardiac care unit. I gave his name at the desk, and a nurse walked me back herself, which told me something before she said a word. It told me she recognized the name, that she knew my father, that she'd probably been the one taking care of him for longer than any family member had shown up to do. "You're his daughter?" she asked. "Yes." She looked at me for a moment. "He's talked about you." She said it gently. Not as an accusation. But it landed like one anyway. My father was asleep when I walked in. He looked smaller than I remembered. He'd lost weight. There was a cannula under his nose, and an IV in his left arm, and a monitor tracking his heart rate with that steady, quiet beep that I immediately decided I would never forget for the rest of my life. His hands were on top of the blanket, folded, and I noticed his wedding ring was still on, which for some reason was the thing that made me start crying. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there and cried silently, watching his chest rise and fall until he opened his eyes. He saw me, and the expression on his face, I can't fully describe it. It was relief and grief at the same time, like someone who had been waiting so long they'd almost stopped believing the thing would actually come. "Hey, kiddo," he said. His voice was rough. "Hey, Dad." I sat in the chair next to his bed, and I took his hand, and I didn't let go for a long time. Over the next hour, I learned things. I learned them from my father, slowly, in pieces, and I learned some of them from his nurse, Pauline, who had clearly formed the kind of bond with my father that happens when a patient has no visitors for weeks, and the nursing staff becomes the closest thing to family he has. 17 days ago, my father had been found by his neighbor, a retired man named Gerald, who lived 3 houses down and occasionally played chess with my father on Sunday afternoons. Gerald had gone over to return a book and found my father on the kitchen floor, conscious but unable to get up. He'd called 911. He'd ridden in the ambulance. He had stayed at the hospital until midnight that first night. A neighbor who had known my father for 8 years, because no family had come. My mother had been notified within hours. She'd come to the hospital once day 2, and then left for Cabo on day 4. She told my father it was already booked and paid for, and that he was in good hands, and that she would be back in 10 days. My siblings had not come at all. My brother had sent flowers. My sister had sent a text. My father had been here, alone, with a cardiac monitor and a cannula and a nurse who knew his coffee order and his daughter's name, but had never actually met either of those things, for 17 days. I went out into the hallway and I called my mother back. "I'm at the hospital," I said. "Oh good, see? He's fine." "He is not fine. He lost 12 pounds. He has a partially blocked artery. He has been alone in a hospital room for 17 days. His neighbor, not his wife. His neighbor was the one who called the ambulance. His neighbor is the one who has checked in on him more than his own family. Rachel, I told you, it was already— I don't care about Cabo." My voice was very quiet. I'd found a corner near a window, and I was looking out at the parking lot and keeping my voice extremely quiet because I was also extremely furious. And those two things were coexisting in a way I hadn't experienced before. I don't care that it was already paid for. Dad had a cardiac event. He could have died. He might still. The doctor told me the next 2 weeks are still critical. And you are at a resort. He told me to go. He told me not to cancel, because that's what Dad does. He has never once in his life asked anyone to sacrifice anything for him. That is not permission. That is who he is. And you know that. Silence. "Come home," I said. "We have 4 more days left, the flights." "I'm not asking." I hung up again. Then I went back inside, sat next to my father, and stayed there until he fell back asleep. When Pauline came in to check his vitals, she and I stood together in the corner of the room, and she quietly explained his medical situation to me in full, the kind of thorough explanation that a doctor gives to a primary family contact, which she told me gently that I was now listed as, because my mother had quietly removed herself from that designation on day 6, without telling anyone. My mother had removed herself as my father's emergency contact and primary family representative on day 6 of his hospitalization, 2 days before she flew to Cabo. I drove back to the house that night. I made myself eat something. There was almost nothing in the refrigerator, which told me that no one had been home in weeks. I found my father's files in the cabinet in his office, the one he'd shown me years ago, and said, "If anything ever happens, everything you need is in here." He'd been saying that since I was in college. I'd always half listened. I sat down at his desk and I listened now. My parents had a joint account, the primary household account, which my father's pension deposited into monthly. For as long as I could remember, my mother managed the finances. That had been the arrangement. My father worked, my mother managed. When he retired 4 years ago, nothing changed. His pension, her management. What I found in those files told me the management had not been going well. There were credit card statements going back 8 months. The balances were large, not catastrophic, but large and growing, and the purchases on them told a story that had nothing to do with household expenses. Hotel stays, restaurant bills, charges from a jewelry retailer I'd never heard of, 2 charges from an airline for round-trip tickets to Miami that my father had never mentioned taking. There was also a letter, unopened, from their mortgage servicer. I opened it. It was a second notice. They were 6 weeks behind on the mortgage. My father's pension, the thing he'd worked 31 years for, was going into an account that was being used to fund a life he wasn't living, while his roses died in the front yard, and he lay alone in a hospital bed, and his neighbor made sure he didn't die on his kitchen floor. I sat with that for a long time. I am not a person who acts impulsively. I want to make that clear. I am methodical by training and by nature. I spent 14 months doing environmental compliance work, which is essentially the professional practice of making sure every action is documented, justified, and traceable. I do not make moves without understanding the consequences. What I did next, I understood completely. My father was listed as a joint account holder. He was cognitively clear. The doctors had confirmed that his heart was the issue, not his mind. I drove back to the hospital the next morning with a folder of documents. I sat with my father, and I explained to him, quietly and plainly, everything I had found. He did not look surprised. He looked tired in the way that people look when they've known something for a long time and haven't had the strength to act on it. I didn't want to bother you, he said. Dad, you were working. Dad, stop. He closed his eyes. What do you need from me? I told him. He signed the paperwork. We contacted the bank together, my father by phone from his hospital bed, me in the branch the next morning, with his signed authorization and a clear explanation of the situation. We did not freeze the account vindictively. We restructured it. My father became the sole account holder. A new account was opened in his name only. His pension deposits were redirected. The joint account, the one my mother had been managing, was closed. It took less than 2 hours. My mother called me at noon that day. She was no longer at poolside. Her voice was no longer bright. My card was declined, she said. I know. Rachel, what did you do? I helped Dad get his finances in order. You had no right. He signed everything, himself, by phone, with a bank representative as witness, from his hospital room. I paused. Where he has been for 19 days. We are stranded here. The resort bill. I booked you 3 flights home, I said. I just emailed you the confirmation numbers. They leave tomorrow morning. You'll be home by tomorrow afternoon. 3 flights. For you, and my brother, and my sister. The return tickets are non-refundable. If you choose not to take them, that's your decision. But those are the tickets that exist. A long silence. This isn't over, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. They came home the next day. I was at the hospital when my mother arrived. And I want to be honest about that moment. I want to describe it accurately. Because it was not the dramatic confrontation that part of me had anticipated. She walked into that room and she saw my father, and something crossed her face that I had not expected. It was not guilt exactly. It was something more complicated than guilt. It was the face of a person who has been outrunning something for a long time and has finally been caught. My father looked at her. He didn't say anything right away. Then he said, I'm glad you're home. That was my father. 36 years of marriage, and he was glad she was home. I had to go stand in the hallway for a few minutes after that. My brother arrived that afternoon. He walked in with a coffee from the place downstairs, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as defensive guilt. The look of someone who knows they did something wrong, but has already prepared their justifications. He started talking before I said anything. He said the flights were expensive. He said he had a work deadline. He said Mom had told him Dad was stable. He let him talk. When he finished, I said, Gerald was here more than you were. Gerald, who has known Dad for 8 years and has no obligation to him whatsoever, came more than you did. I want you to sit with that. He sat with it. He didn't argue. My sister came in an hour later. She is 24 and has always been the one who follows the loudest voice in the room, and for most of her life that voice has been my mother's. She looked genuinely shaken when she saw my father. I think she had been successfully not thinking about the reality of it the whole time she was away, and seeing him in that bed made the reality of it impossible to avoid. She cried. He held her hand, because again, that is who he is. The next 2 weeks were hard in every direction. My father's condition improved slowly, steadily, with the kind of progress that is almost invisible day to day, but becomes clear when you look back at where you started. Pauline told me on day 26 that she thought he was going to be okay. She said it quietly, at the end of a long shift, standing in the hallway with her badge clipped to her scrubs, and I had to take a breath before I could respond. There were hard conversations in those 2 weeks. With my mother, several of them. She did not give up easily, and I did not expect her to. She framed what I had done as a betrayal, which told me a great deal about how she understood the situation. I framed it as the only responsible action available to me given what I had found, and I told her that if she wanted to have a full conversation about the financial records, all of them, in detail, I was available for that conversation. She dropped the betrayal framing after that. My brother and I talked, really talked, for the first time in years. He is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. He is a person who learned very early in our family that making himself invisible was safer than making himself present, and that instinct had calcified over the years into genuine neglect. He didn't come to the hospital because he didn't know how to be someone who comes to hospitals. I don't fully forgive that, not yet, but I understand it in a way I didn't before. My sister and I are still figuring it out. We always have been. My father came home on day 31. I had been in his house for 2 weeks by then. I'd extended my stay, rearranged some things with work, made myself available. I had cleaned out the refrigerator and stocked it properly. I had dealt with the mortgage servicer, who was understanding once the situation was explained, and a payment was made from the new account. I had found a financial advisor who specialized in retirement-age clients, and I had made an appointment. The day my father came home, it was raining. I had his chair positioned so he could see the front yard. He sat down, slowly, and looked out the window for a long time. "The roses are gone," he said. "I know. I'm sorry. She planted those the year you were born." I didn't say anything. "I always meant to learn their names," he said. "The specific variety." She knew, but I never asked. He was quiet for a moment. I should have asked. He wasn't really talking about the roses. I sat with him until he fell asleep in his chair. Then I went outside, and I stood on the porch in the rain, and I looked at the empty bed where those plants used to be, and I made a decision that surprised me a little. I took out my phone and I searched for the nursery my mother used to drive 40 minutes to reach. They were still open. They carried the same variety. I placed an order for 12 new plants, scheduled for delivery the following week. I don't know what's going to happen with this family. I don't know what happens next between my parents, or what my mother does with the conversation we still haven't finished, or whether my brother's presence at those Sunday chess games becomes something he maintains, or something he slides away from once the immediate crisis fades. I don't know if the version of us that exists right now present, paying attention, accountable survives contact with ordinary life, with work schedules and distance, and the comfortable habit of not showing up. What I know is that my father is home. His heart is monitored. His finances are protected. His pension goes into an account with his name on it, and no one can redirect it without his knowledge. And when those roses come, I will plant them myself. I'll put them exactly where the old ones were, along the front walkway, so that when someone pulls up to this house they see something living, something that requires attention, something that dies when it's left alone too long. I think my father deserves at least that much. I think we all do.